Hi, it's Callum. So we're going to look at the female reproductive system in the next few videos. So the first of these videos, I'm going to talk about two structures. So there's the ovary, which is this bit here, and I'm going to talk about the fallopian tube, which is the remaining tissue in this section. So the ovary, let's look at that at low power first of all. So the ovary has two main different parts to it. There's the ovarian cortex, which is this peripheral part, which is kind of has a blue appearance with pink stuff in it. And then there is the ovarian hilum, which is very highly vascular. It's full of blood vessels and connective tissue. And there's not really much to say about the ovarian hilum other than that. It's the cortex where everything happens. And then the other part of it is right at the very edge of the cortex. It has got this simple epithelial lining, which is continuous with the mesothelium that lines the peritoneal cavity. The ovary hangs in the serosal cavity, so that's what that is. So let's look at the cortex, the ovarian cortex. So it's very blue, isn't it? And that's because it's taking up a lot of hematoxylin pigment, and that is because most of the material that we're seeing here is nuclear material. These cells don't have very much cytoplasm. These are the cells of the ovarian stroma, and they are spindle-shaped cells or fusiform-shaped cells. That is to say, if we look at the nuclei, it's difficult to say where the cytoplasm ends and begins between the cells. So we'll look at the nuclei. The nuclei taper off, see, at each end, and that's what a spindle cell. That's the hallmark of a spindled or fusiform cell. It's that tapering. So there's lots of cells packed closely together. They have this wavy look in places, and that's normal. That's normal ovarian stroma of the ovarian cortex. That's what it looks like. Interspersed with this, here's one, are these pink blobs. So these pink blobs have hardly any cellular material in them, hardly any hematoxylin stained nuclei within them. That's because they're mostly made of collagen, and that's because they are basically scars. This is scar tissue. Now, the thing that is missing from this section, or this ovary, which would, because it's postmenopausal, which would be present in a premenopausal ovary, are the follicles containing oocytes. As I said, that's because this is a postmenopausal. Now, I could have hunted down a premenopausal example to show you. However, this is a practical introduction to pathology, and realistically, these are the specimens you're going to see are going to be postmenopausal ovaries. Now, under the normal physiological circumstances, follicles contain oocytes. Now, during pregnancy or during the ovulatory cycle, these will rupture to expel an oocyte, and the follicles proliferate and become the corpus lutea, which have an endocrine role which support the pregnancy. However, after the ovulatory cycle or after the pregnancy, these degenerate and become scar tissue, which we call the corpus albicans. And this is an example of that here. Here's a big one. Here's another one. Here's another one. You know, there's dots. They're all dotted all over the place. So these are the corpus albicans, and it's normal in a postmenopausal ovary for it to have such extensive replacement with these of the cortex by these corpus albicans. There's one other thing in this section that I'll draw your attention to, and that's this thing. Oh, I'm sorry. That's this thing. So this is a cyst, and this is a cyst lined. Probably, I think this has got cilia. So I think this is a cyst lined by simple pseudostratified epithelium. Now there are different cysts you can get within the ovary. This is a small one. There's no way that was the reason this ovary was excised. This is an incidental finding in this ovary, and that's very common to find incidental cysts. You get corpus luteum cysts, you get follicular cysts, you get epithelial inclusion cysts. You can get yourself tied up in knots worrying about the origin of these various cysts and what to call them. I would suggest that if they're under 1 centimeter and they have a simple cell lining, call them simple cysts and move on with your life. because it really doesn't matter. So yeah, so that's pretty much all there is to say about this ovary. Yeah, this is the normal postmenopausal ovary. It's a common tissue type that you'll be examining. That's what it looks like. So let's move on. So the rest of the tissue in this section is the fallopian tube. Now the fallopian tube is a tube, and its purpose is to transmit the egg from the ovary to the endometrial cavity. It's got three main components, or three main parts to the tube. There's the isthmic end, or the isthmus, which is nearest the ovary. There's the ampulla in the middle, and the infundibulum. So this section here is probably from maybe the ampulla, mid-tube. This section here is from the infundibulum. And I can tell that because the infundibulum has a specific structure where it's thrown into these long finger-like projections called fimbria. And for practical purposes, we don't tend to refer to the isthmus, ampulla, and infundibulum. We tend to talk about the tube and the fimbrial end. So this is the fimbrial end, and the fimbrial end has got this fimbrial structure, this finger-like structure. So let's look in a bit higher power at the structure here. So this is the tube, and I think if we zoom in on the wall of the tube, we'll be able to see some smooth muscle. Yeah, so here are some smooth muscle cells here, cigar-shaped nuclei, eosinophilic cytoplasm in the wall of the tube. And that's because they have contractile ability and they help the tube contract in a kind of peristalsis-like way, propel the oocyte towards the endometrial cavity. Now, the tube is also lined by the same stuff that lines the fimbrial end, which is simple epithelium. So it's simple columnar epithelium, and it's simple pseudostratified columnar epithelium because it looks like they're heaped up on top of each other and maybe stratified, but they're not. All of these cells will all connect with the basement membrane, so it's pseudostratified, not true stratified epithelium. And it's also ciliated epithelium, so it's pseudostratified ciliated epithelium. You can see these cilia, and these cilia they are motile. They're not inactive. They can move and provide a beating action, which propels fluid or indeed the ovary, the egg along towards the endometrial cavity. And in among these stratified cells, there are also secretory cells that don't have the cilia. There are also intercalated cells, which again don't have cilia. I mean, far be it from me, it's beyond me to point out which one is an intercalated cell and which one is a secretory cell. But suffice to say, there's the three cell types here within the epithelium. So that's it, pseudostratified ciliated epithelium. And it's the same epithelium that lines this fimbrial end. So if we look in just to prove it to you, again, pseudostratified, they look like they're heaped up, but they're not really. They've got these elongated nuclei with these cilia on the surface. Okay, so as I was saying, the fimbrial end is kind of important. We tend, as a routine, to process the entire fimbrial end. It is thought that a lot of epithelial tumors of so-called ovarian origin actually originate from the fimbrial end of the fallopian tube. And so it is usually we process the entire fimbrial end of the tube and examine it, have a good look at it. And particularly for patients, sometimes we get, for patients with BRCA gene mutation who are at high risk of developing epithelial tumors, they might get their fallopian tubes excised as a prophylactic measure to prevent them developing epithelial tumors derived from the fimbrial end of the fallopian tube. And then we process the whole thing and have a very good look to look for the precursors of serous carcinoma, which can arise from the fimbrial end of the tube. Anyway, it's beyond the remit of this video to go into the details of that, but hopefully you've got a general overview at least, and you know where to start now when you look at a section of ovary or fallopian tube. Okay, we're going to move on now to the next section where we're going to look at the uterus and endometrium. Okay, great. Speak to you soon.